Some houses don't go dark when the lights go out, they wake up. The rain had been falling steady for hours, the kind that softened the edges of the world and turned every sound into something distant and hollow. And Ethan Cole sat alone inside the old cabin, listening to it drum against the roof like a slow, patient heartbeat, a rhythm he had once learned to ignore but never truly forgot, because silence, real silence, had never followed him home from the war. It only changed shape. And tonight it felt different, heavier somehow, like the air itself was waiting for something to begin. And across the room Rex suddenly lifted his head, ears snapping forward with a precision that pulled Ethan's attention instantly, because he knew that posture, had seen it in deserts and shattered buildings and places where the ground itself could betray you without warning. And the dog didn't bark, didn't move, just stared into the empty space near the far wall, as if something invisible had stepped into the room. And then came the low growl, deep and controlled. The kind that never came without reason. The kind that made Ethan's pulse slow instead of race. Because fear was loud, but instinct was quiet. And Rex trusted instinct. Always had. And Ethan set his coffee down without taking his eyes off the dog. The warmth of it fading into the cold air as he stood, boots creaking softly against the old wooden floor, every step measured, every breath steady. Because whatever Rex sensed wasn't chaos. It was pattern, and patterns meant something could be understood. And that was the only thing that ever gave him peace. And then, without warning, the lights went out. Not flickering, not dimming, just gone. Like a switch had been flipped somewhere outside the reach of the world he knew. And the cabin fell into darkness, so complete it felt almost solid, pressing in around him. And for a moment there was nothing but the sound of rain and the faint hum of something he couldn't place. Something low and distant, like a vibration beneath the floorboards. And Rex didn't move, didn't break his stance, just let out another quiet growl, softer this time but deeper, as if whatever he sensed had moved closer. And Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand brushing along the wall until his fingers found the cold edge of the switch, flicking it once, twice. Nothing. No response. No click. No resistance. Just silence. And that was when he noticed it, the faintest shift beneath his boots. Not a tremor, not quite movement, but something repeating, subtle and precise, like a pulse buried under layers of wood and time. And he froze, listening, counting without thinking, the way he used to when seconds mattered. More than anything else. 1, 2, 3. And there it was again, the same rhythm, steady, controlled, not random, never random. And Rex stepped forward then, placing one paw gently against the floor near the base of the wall, his head tilting slightly, as if aligning himself with the sound, his amber eyes reflecting the faint gray light leaking through the window. And Ethan felt it settle in his chest. That quiet certainty he hadn't trusted in years, that whatever this was, it wasn't an accident. And it wasn't new. It had been here long before he arrived, waiting, silent, hidden beneath the surface of a place everyone else had forgotten. And for the first time since stepping into the cabin, Ethan realized something that made the darkness feel different, less empty, less random, as if the house itself had been listening, just like Rex, just like him. And now that he was finally paying attention, it had decided to answer. The darkness did not feel empty anymore. It felt occupied, and Ethan stayed still for a long moment, letting his breathing slow until it matched the rhythm beneath the floor, because rushing had never revealed anything worth finding. And whatever this was, it was not trying to hide. It was repeating, patient, deliberate, like something waiting to be understood. And Rex shifted his weight slightly, pressing his palm more firmly against the wood, his growl fading into a low hum in his throat. No longer warning, more like recognition. And that change mattered, because Rex did not calm unless the unknown had become something familiar. And Ethan crouched beside him, placing his palm flat against the floor where the dog indicated, the wood cold beneath his skin, worn smooth by years of footsteps that no longer existed. And there it was again, clearer now, a faint vibration rising through his hand in steady intervals, not random noise, not the loose rattle of an old structure, but something structured, measured, almost intentional. And he closed his eyes for a second, letting memory fill the gaps. The way he used to interpret signals in places where visibility meant nothing and survival depended on listening. And the timing settled into his mind, slow, but exact, repeating with a precision that made his chest tighten slightly, not with fear, but with recognition, because patterns like this were never natural. And he opened his eyes again, glancing toward the far wall where Rex had first focused, and for the first time he noticed how the shadows there were different, not darker, but deeper, as if the wall held more than it showed. And he stood, moving carefully across the room, each step deliberate, the old boards creaking softly under his weight, echoing in the silence that had grown thick around them. And when he reached the wall, he ran his fingers along the surface, tracing the seams between the wooden panels, feeling for anything out of place, any shift in texture or temperature. And after a moment his hand paused, because one section felt cooler, subtly different, like air had once moved behind it and never quite stopped. And Rex stepped beside him immediately, nose brushing the same spot, his tail low but steady, no longer tense, just certain. And Ethan pressed his palm flat against that section, waiting, counting again without thinking. And when the next pulse came, it was stronger here, closer, as if whatever produced it lay just beyond the barrier, separated by inches instead of feet. And he exhaled slowly, a quiet realization settling into place, that the house was not just reacting, it was responding. And that meant there was something inside it that still functioned, still persisted despite time, despite abandonment, despite everything that should have silenced it long ago. And he stepped back, scanning the wall more carefully now, eyes adjusting to the faint gray light from the storm outside, until he noticed a thin line he had missed before, barely visible, running vertically along the panel, too straight to be natural, too subtle to be decorative. And he reached out again, pressing along its edge, testing it gently, and the wood gave slightly under his hand, not loose, but separate, like a door that had not been opened in years. And behind him, Rex let out a soft, almost inaudible sound, not a growl, not a bark, but something closer to anticipation. And Ethan felt it too, that quiet shift in the air, the sense that whatever had been waiting beneath the surface was now closer to being seen. And for the first time since the lights went out, the darkness did not feel like an obstacle, it felt like an invitation. The panel did not open all at once. It shifted slowly under Ethan's pressure, releasing with a faint sound like wood remembering how to move after years of stillness. And a narrow seam widened just enough to let a breath of colder air slip through, carrying with it a scent that did not belong to the cabin above, something older, metallic and quiet, like a place untouched by weather or time. And Ethan paused, his hand still against the wood, because that change in air meant one thing he understood clearly. There was space behind the wall, real space, not just hollow framing. And Rex stepped forward without hesitation, nose pressing into the opening, drawing in that hidden air with steady, controlled breaths, his body no longer tense but focused, as if he had already accepted what lay beyond as something meant to be found. And Ethan pushed a little more, widening the gap until the panel gave way enough to reveal darkness behind it, deeper than the room itself, a darkness that did not reflect the faint light from the storm outside. And for a moment neither of them moved, because the silence inside that space felt different, contained, almost deliberate. And then the vibration came again, stronger now, close enough that Ethan felt it through the wood beneath his boots and through the air itself, a steady pulse that seemed to echo off unseen surfaces below. And he leaned closer, peering through the narrow opening, his eyes adjusting slowly until faint shapes began to form, not clearly, but enough to suggest depth, a drop rather than a passage. And he reached inside, his fingers brushing against something solid just beyond the threshold, not rough like the cabin walls, but smooth, colder, more deliberate in its construction. And that detail settled into his mind with quiet certainty. This had not been built as part of the cabin. It had been placed here, hidden, preserved. And behind him the wind shifted slightly, pressing against the structure with a low, distant sound. But inside the wall the air remained still, undisturbed, as if sealed from the outside world. And Rex stepped back just enough to look up at Ethan, his amber eyes calm, steady, waiting, not urging forward, not warning retreat, simply holding that silent agreement they had built over years, that whatever came next, they would face it together. And Ethan nodded slightly, more to himself than to the dog, before reaching again, this time sliding his hand further along the inner edge, until he found what felt like a handle, metal, cool and worn, positioned just out of sight from anyone standing in the room. And he wrapped his fingers around it, testing gently, and felt resistance at first, then a slow give, like a mechanism unlocking after a long pause. And the sound that followed was soft but unmistakable, a deeper shift beneath the floor, as if something below had been waiting for that exact movement. And Rex's ears lifted again, not in alarm, but in attention, and the pulse beneath them grew slightly more pronounced, no longer distant, no longer hidden, but present, active, and Ethan felt it then, not fear, not uncertainty, but a quiet realization settling into place, that this was not something he had stumbled upon by chance. The pattern, the signal, the placement, all of it pointed to intention, to design, to something left behind for someone willing to listen closely enough to find it. And as the hidden mechanism completed its slow release, the darkness beyond the wall seemed to open just a little more, not with light, but with possibility, like a door that had been closed not to keep something out, but to wait for the right moment to be opened. The hidden mechanism did not stop once it began. It continued with a slow and deliberate motion that Ethan could feel through the floor beneath his feet, a quiet shifting that carried downward rather than outward, and the panel beside him opened just enough to reveal the true shape of what lay behind it. Not a hollow wall, but a narrow descent carved with intention, the edge of a stairway disappearing into darkness below, and the air rising from it was colder, steadier, untouched by the storm outside, as if whatever existed beneath the cabin had its own sense of time, separate from the world above. And Ethan stood there for a moment, his hand still resting on the metal handle, listening again to the rhythm that had drawn him here, now clearer than ever, a pulse that seemed to come from below rather than within the walls, steady and precise. And Rex stepped forward without hesitation, placing one paw onto the first step, testing it, his weight shifting carefully, his body language calm but alert, not cautious in fear, but attentive in purpose. And Ethan watched him closely, because the dog had always known the difference between danger and direction, and this was direction, unmistakable. And with a slow breath, Ethan reached to the side, feeling along the edge of the opening until his fingers brushed against a small metal fixture embedded into the frame, a switch or latch of some kind. And when he pressed it, a faint glow flickered to life below, not bright, not immediate, but gradual, like light returning after a long absence, revealing the outline of the steps, narrow and worn but solid, descending perhaps 10 or 12 feet into a space that remained mostly hidden. And the source of the light was not clear, no visible bulb or wiring in the usual sense, just a soft illumination that seemed to come from within the structure itself. And that detail settled into Ethan's mind with quiet weight, because nothing about this had been left to chance. Everything was placed, timed, preserved, and Rex began to move down the steps slowly, each movement deliberate, his nails making a soft clicking sound against the surface, echoing faintly into the space below. And Ethan followed, one hand brushing along the wall for balance, the other slightly extended as if measuring the air ahead. And as he descended, the temperature dropped a few degrees, the scent of aged metal and stillness growing stronger, not unpleasant, but unfamiliar, like a place that had been sealed long enough to forget the outside world. And the pulse beneath them continued, now more defined, no longer just a vibration but a presence, something active, something functioning. And when Ethan reached the bottom step, the space opened slightly, just enough to stand upright, and the light steadied into a soft glow that revealed smooth surfaces along the walls, not wood, not stone, but something more deliberate, crafted with precision. And directly ahead, about 6 feet away, stood a door unlike anything in the cabin above, solid, seamless, with no visible hinges, only a faint outline marking its edges. And at its center, a small panel pulsed with the same rhythm he had been feeling since the beginning, each beat of light matching the timing he had counted before. And Rex stopped in front of it, sitting back on his haunches, his posture calm, his gaze fixed on the panel, no longer growling, no longer searching, just waiting, as if the path had already been found and all that remained was for Ethan to understand what it meant. And in that quiet moment, standing beneath a house that had hidden this secret for who knew how long. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not confusion, but a quiet recognition that whatever this place was, it had not been built to keep people out. It had been built to wait for the right one to finally step inside. The pulsing panel at the center of the door did not react immediately when Ethan stepped closer. It continued its steady rhythm as if unaware of his presence, or perhaps unconcerned by it, and he stood there for a moment, studying the pattern more carefully now that he could see it clearly, each soft glow rising and fading in precise intervals, not random, not mechanical in the usual sense, but intentional, almost like a signal waiting to be recognized rather than activated, and Rex remained. Still beside him, his posture relaxed yet attentive, his eyes fixed on the light with a quiet focus that told Ethan everything he needed to know. This was not a warning. It was a message, and messages were meant to be understood, not feared, and Ethan leaned slightly closer, his gaze narrowing as he counted again, letting the timing settle into his mind the way it always had when something mattered. 1, 2, 3, pause, then again, the same sequence, repeating with perfect consistency. And something in that rhythm stirred a memory he had not expected, not of danger, not of conflict, but of training, long hours spent learning how to interpret coded signals in environments where visibility meant nothing, where meaning came from patterns hidden beneath noise. And he exhaled slowly, his mind aligning with the pulse, translating without words, recognizing the structure beneath it, and without thinking, he raised his hand, hovering at just inches from the panel, not touching yet, just matching its rhythm, letting his movement follow the same timing. And for a brief second nothing changed. The light continued as it had, steady and indifferent, but then, almost imperceptibly, the glow shifted, not in brightness, but in tone, responding in a way that felt less like activation and more like acknowledgement, and Rex tilted his head slightly, a small movement that carried no tension, only quiet awareness, and Ethan felt it then. That subtle shift in the air, the sense that whatever system lay behind this door had recognized the pattern being returned to it, not as a command, but as an answer, and he let his hand move closer, finally pressing his palm gently against the center of the panel in sync with the next pulse. And this time the response was immediate. The rhythm paused for the first time since he had discovered it, holding still for a single, silent moment before resuming at a slower pace, deeper, more resonant, like a heartbeat adjusting to a new presence, and the faint outline of the door became more defined, a thin line tracing its edges as something inside it shifted, not opening yet, but preparing, and Ethan stepped back half a pace, not out of fear, but out of respect for the process unfolding in front of him, because this was not something to force, it was something to follow, and the light continued its new rhythm, slower now, more deliberate, and Rex lowered himself gently to the ground, resting but alert, as if he understood that whatever came next required stillness rather than action, and Ethan watched in silence, his senses attuned not to what he could see, but to what he could feel, the subtle hum beneath the floor, the steady presence of something functioning beyond sight, and the quiet realization that this place, hidden beneath an ordinary cabin, had not simply been built to contain something valuable. It had been designed to communicate, to respond, to wait for someone who could listen closely enough to hear what it had been saying all along. The change in rhythm did not end where Ethan expected it to. It continued to evolve, each pulse of light deepening in tone until it no longer felt like a signal, but something closer to recognition, and the door responded in kind, a faint vibration running along its edges as if unseen components were aligning behind the surface, preparing for a movement that had been delayed for years, maybe decades, and Ethan remained still, his eyes fixed on the panel, his breathing steady, because whatever mechanism was at work here was not reacting to force, it was responding to presence, to timing, to something far more precise than any simple trigger, and Rex did not move either, his body relaxed against the ground, but his gaze never leaving the door, calm and certain, the way he had been when guiding Ethan through places where instinct mattered more than sight, and the silence in the room shifted again, not emptier, but fuller, as if the air itself had begun to carry a quiet awareness, and then, without warning, the light in the panel stopped pulsing altogether, holding steady for a long, suspended moment that seemed to stretch beyond time, and Ethan felt it in his chest. That pause, that stillness, like the held breath before something important begins. And then the door released, not with a sudden motion, but with a slow and deliberate separation, a thin line widening at its center as the two halves began to slide apart, revealing a soft glow from within, warmer than the light outside, steadier, almost welcoming. And Ethan took a small step forward, not out of urgency, but out of quiet understanding that this was the moment everything had been leading to. And as the opening widened enough to see inside, the space beyond came into view, not large, not expansive, but carefully constructed, every surface smooth and intentional. The walls lined with materials that reflected the light in a muted, even tone. And at the center of the room, resting on a platform about waist-high, was a compact structure unlike anything he had seen before, a sealed unit with no visible seams except for a narrow panel along its front. And the same rhythm he had followed upstairs now echoed faintly from within it, slower, deeper, more grounded, like the source rather than the signal. And Ethan stepped fully into the room, his boots making almost no sound against the surface beneath him, and the air inside felt different, not just cooler or stiller, but balanced, as if everything here had been designed to remain unchanged regardless of what happened above. And Rex rose quietly and followed, his movements calm and measured, stopping just beside Ethan as they both faced the structure. And for a moment neither of them moved, because the presence of it was enough, the quiet weight of something preserved, something intentional, something left behind not by accident but by choice. And Ethan felt that realization settle into place with a kind of clarity he had not experienced in years, that this was not just a hidden room, not just a forgotten mechanism. It was a message, one that had been waiting patiently for someone who could understand it. And as he stepped closer to the platform, the light within the structure shifted slightly, responding once more to his presence, not brighter, not louder, but clearer, as if whatever had been left here had finally found the one it had been meant to reach. The structure at the center of the room did not feel like an object waiting to be opened. It felt like something waiting to be understood, and Ethan slowed his steps as he approached it, his eyes tracing every detail, the smooth surface, the seamless edges, the faint glow that pulsed from within as if it carried its own quiet life. And the closer he moved, the more he noticed how precise everything was, not a single mark out of place, not a single element left unfinished, as if whoever built this had not only intended it to last, but to endure without change, without decay. And Rex remained at his side, matching his pace exactly, his breathing calm, his posture steady, no longer searching, no longer signaling, just present, as if his role had shifted from guide to witness. And Ethan reached the platform, stopping just inches from the structure. And for a moment he did nothing, because something about this space demanded stillness, not action. And the pulse within the unit continued, slow and steady, each beat resonating softly through the air, not loud enough to hear clearly, but strong enough to feel, like a distant echo that had found its way into the present. And then, as if responding to his pause, the front panel of the structure changed, not opening yet, but becoming transparent in a narrow section, revealing a layer beneath the surface. And what he saw there made him hold his breath without realizing it, not out of fear, but out of recognition, because inside, carefully preserved and untouched by time, was a set of objects arranged with intention, a small metal case, a stack of documents sealed in protective layers, and beside them, something that looked unmistakably familiar, a military insignia, worn but intact, the kind issued decades ago, the kind he had not seen since the early years of his service. And his mind moved quickly, connecting details he had not expected to find here, because this was not random, not a forgotten stash or an abandoned storage. It was personal, deliberate, and the pulse beneath the structure shifted again, softer now, almost like it had reached the part of its sequence it had been waiting for. And Rex stepped forward slightly, lowering his head, not sniffing, not investigating, just acknowledging. And Ethan felt it then, the quiet certainty that this place had not been built to hide something from the world, but to protect something for the right moment, for the right person. And he reached out slowly, placing his hand against the surface where the panel had become clear, his palm resting lightly, Not pressing, not forcing, just making contact, and the response was immediate but gentle, the light within the structure brightening just enough to illuminate the contents more clearly. And among the documents he could now see writing, names, dates, and something else. Something that made his chest tighten slightly. Because one of those names was not unfamiliar. It was one he had heard before, one that had been spoken years ago in a different place, under very different circumstances. And as the realization began to take shape, Ethan understood something deeper than the discovery itself, that this was not just a hidden message, not just a preserved archive. It was a continuation, a connection that had stretched across time, waiting quietly until someone who could recognize it stood here, in this exact moment, ready to see what had never truly been lost. The name did not fade when Ethan read it again. It remained exactly as it had first appeared, clear and steady beneath the soft glow, and something in his chest shifted in a way he had not expected, not sharp, not overwhelming, but deep, like a memory rising slowly to the surface after years of silence. And he leaned closer to the transparent panel, his eyes tracing the letters carefully, because there was no mistake, no misreading. It was the same name he had heard spoken years ago in briefings and quiet conversations, a man who had disappeared during an operation that had never fully made sense, a man whose absence had left questions no one could answer. And now, somehow, those questions were here, waiting beneath a house that should have been nothing more than a forgotten structure in the woods. And Rex remained beside him, calm and steady, his presence grounding Ethan in the moment, reminding him without words that this was not confusion. This was clarity unfolding one layer at a time, and the light within the structure adjusted again, brightening just enough to reveal more detail within the documents, lines of text becoming legible, dates aligning with moments Ethan recognized, locations that matched fragments of memory he had long set aside. And he reached out slowly, his hand hovering near the panel as if asking permission rather than taking control. And when his fingers touched the surface this time, the response was immediate but gentle, the front section of the unit unlocking with a soft internal shift, the seam along its edge becoming visible as it prepared to open, and Ethan stepped back slightly as the panel slid aside, revealing the contents fully for the first time. And the air in the room seemed to hold still, as if acknowledging the weight of what was being uncovered, and he leaned forward again, his movements careful, respectful, as he lifted the top document from the stack, the material firm but preserved, untouched by time. And as he began to read, the pieces that had never fit together before started to align with quiet precision. The mission, the disappearance, the unexplained signals that had once been dismissed as interference. All of it now carried a different meaning. Because this was not a failure. It had been a continuation, something hidden intentionally, protected until the right moment, and beneath the documents he found the small metal case, its surface cool and solid in his hands. And when he opened it, the contents inside confirmed what he was beginning to understand, a set of keys, identification markers, and a sealed envelope bearing the same name he had just read. And this time, beneath it, another line had been added, written in a steady hand that had expected this moment to come, and Ethan felt his breath slow as he realized the truth that had been waiting here all along, that this was not just a message from the past. It was a transfer, a passing forward of something unfinished, something entrusted, and Rex shifted slightly at his side, his tail giving a single, quiet movement, not excitement, not tension, just acknowledgement, as if the purpose that had guided him here had now been fulfilled. And Ethan looked around the room once more, taking in the stillness, the precision, the quiet intention in every detail. And for the first time since stepping into the cabin, he understood completely that this place had never been meant to remain hidden forever. It had been waiting for someone who could recognize its meaning, someone who would not just find it, but understand why it had been left behind. The room did not change after Ethan opened the case and read the final line. It remained still, balanced, as if its purpose had already been fulfilled the moment he understood what had been left behind. And for a long time he did not move, standing there with the documents in his hands, the quiet weight of them settling into something deeper than thought, something closer to acceptance, because what he had found was not just information, not just a hidden record of the past. It was a continuation of a path that had never truly ended. And he realized then that the signals, the patterns, the way the place had responded to him, none of it had been random. It had been designed for recognition, for someone who would not ignore what could not be easily explained, someone who would stay long enough to listen. And Rex shifted gently beside him, lowering himself onto the floor once more, his breathing slow and steady, no longer alert, no longer searching, simply at rest, as if whatever had drawn him here had now come to its natural conclusion. And Ethan placed the documents carefully back onto the platform, his movements measured and deliberate, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for what they represented. And as he closed the metal case, the light within the structure softened slightly, not fading, not shutting down, but settling into a quieter state, like a system that no longer needed to call out, because it had been heard. And he stepped back, taking in the room one last time, the smooth walls, the steady glow, the sense of stillness that no longer felt mysterious but understood. And he turned toward the stairway, not rushed, not uncertain, just ready. And Rex rose without needing a command, falling into step beside him as they moved back toward the opening, their footsteps quiet against the surface beneath them. And as they climbed the narrow steps, the air shifted again, growing warmer with each foot, the faint sound of rain returning, the distant world above slowly coming back into reach. And when Ethan stepped through the panel into the cabin once more, the darkness no longer felt heavy. It felt ordinary, familiar, and the storm outside had begun to ease, the steady rain softening into a light drizzle that tapped gently against the roof. And he paused for a moment in the center of the room, looking around at the simple space that had hidden something far greater beneath it. And Rex walked a slow circle. Before settling near the door, his ears relaxed, his posture calm, no longer tuned to anything beyond the present moment. And Ethan let out a quiet breath, one he had not realized he had been holding for years, not just since entering the cabin, but long before that, carried from places where answers never came. And he understood now that not every signal was meant to warn, not every silence meant something was missing. Sometimes it meant something was waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right willingness to stay and listen. And as the first hint of morning light began to push through the clouds outside, casting a faint gray glow across the room, Ethan felt something settle into place within him, not a resolution, not an ending, but a quiet sense of direction. And he knew without needing to say it that whatever had begun beneath that cabin would not end there. It would move forward, carried not by noise or urgency, but by the same steady rhythm that had led him to it in the first place. And for the first time in a long while, the silence around him did not feel empty. It felt complete.